Today, I want to share with you something that I wish I understood when I was first understanding and learning about complex PTSD, because this information could help you to save years of struggle, of suffering, and self-blame. So what we're going to talk about are 5 CPTSD beliefs, and I call them CPTSD beliefs because it is very rare that you would have complex PTSD without one or all of these beliefs running in the background of your subconscious mind. And these 5 beliefs keep trauma alive in your body, even if the traumatic events happened years or decades ago. And so until we learn about them and shift out of them, we wind up staying stuck in painful cycles, regardless of how much effort we're putting into changing our external world. So that being said, let's dive in.
For those of you that don't know me, my name is Michelle. I'm a somatic experiencing practitioner and the founder of the School of Transformation, which is where I meet live on Zoom every week with survivors from all over the world of childhood trauma. Here on my YouTube channel, we talk about what healing is about, what it looks like, the symptoms of unhealed trauma. But in the School of Transformation, we do the inner healing together. So if you're ready to take the next step, make sure you join me weekly on Zoom.
When I was first healing, I thought that trauma was what happened to me. And so because of that, I spent a lot of time in the story and details about what happened. And the reality is you can spend forever in those stories, in those details, and still stay stuck. And so thankfully, what I learned with time was that trauma really was the story that got stuck in my body, the story that started but never got completed because it was too overwhelming for my nervous system at the time. And so my nervous system kind of stepped in a brilliant way to compartmentalize and pause that story until I was old enough to come back and complete it. And so when it comes to those beliefs, here's the interesting thing. We can have completely different circumstances, or we could have faced completely different traumas or traumatic events, I should say, and yet if those traumatic events have formulated and imprinted our nervous system with the same beliefs, despite the different circumstances, we end up with the same malware in our nervous system. And this was really apparent to me at one time when I first formed the School of Transformation. I used to talk a lot about narcissistic abuse and the imprint it has on a person's nervous system. And so a lot of the people that joined the School of Transformation joined with that traumatic background. But then one member joined and she flat out said, she's like, I have not been through narcissistic abuse, but when you talk about the coping skills, the ways you're stuck, the nervous system of what you went through, it's the same for me. And she then explained her trauma and what she had been through. And it was completely different. And yet we understood each other because the belief system and the malware in our nervous system was the same. So for example, for some, they have these core beliefs due to any form of abuse, whether it's physical, emotional, or SA. They just weren't around the way the child needed them. For others, it may have been betrayal, bullying, even medical trauma, or growing up with a parent that didn't know how to tune into you the way you needed them to. So those are examples of different traumatic events, right? But oftentimes those events are over. And there are a lot of therapies that could be helpful to work through that. Talk therapy, having someone to hear your story, having a space to share is super important. However, that can only get you so far. At some point, we then have to address the story that's still stuck. Not just what happened, but what is still there in the body, even though the events are over. Because that's where the suffering that happened in the past, which is so unfortunate that that happened in the past, but it's the stuck story that creates a program, a sequence that keeps that suffering alive even after the traumatic events are over. And that's what we really want to uproot. Kind of like weeds in the garden, we want to uproot them so that even though we can't change our past, we can embrace the present in a way that allows us to step into a life that we deserve, living as who we truly are instead of who the trauma turned us into. In other words, the beliefs are like malware on a computer. You can buy all the fancy apps you want, but if the malware is running in the background, your computer is just constantly going to be glitching over and over again. So in our case, the CPTSD beliefs, they shape our coping skills. Our coping skills are what our body learned to do to survive. They are not our personality traits. They are not who we really are. They make up the protective self and not the authentic self. And those coping skills affect our work. They affect our relationships. They affect our relationship with self. They even affect our health. So let's break them down and see if any sound familiar to you. So number one is I'm not safe to be myself. So regardless if whether this was from narcissistic relationships or bullying, if we have this belief, it shows up with a sequence or coping skills that cause us to people please, to be perfectionistic, or simply to tone our shine down. In other words, it wants to shut down your true self because it doesn't feel safe to allow you to be authentic. This subconscious program is designed to keep you living in protective mode instead of authentic mode and connection mode. Belief number two, I have to be in control to feel safe. When the world felt chaotic or unsafe, many of us learned to control everything, our emotions, our perceptions, and our environment. But this constant hypervigilance keeps our nervous system stuck in fight or flight so that we're never able to truly rest, which sadly can create so many health problems later on. CPTSD belief number three, I'm too much or I'm not enough. These are two sides of the same coin. So if you are shamed for your needs or your emotions, then you learn to shrink them down and hide and suppress them. Or maybe you were told you're never enough, and so now you chase achievement, but the goalpost is always moving. In other words, because this belief is in your nervous system or in your subconscious, it doesn't matter how much you achieve, you still never feel enough. CPTSD belief number four, I am not worthy of love or goodness. This belief forms when we internalize the blame for the bad things that happened. For a child, it's more safe to feel like it's my fault than to feel like my parents aren't safe, because a child can't comprehend that a parent is incapable of love. So they decide they must be the problem. And so the coping skills that develop create a lifetime of accepting breadcrumbs in relationships or staying with people who mirror that original wound. CPTSD belief number five, if I relax, something bad will happen. Now, this is a sneaky one. So many of us feel wired to anticipate danger, even when life is fine. So we stay busy, we distract ourselves, or we stay worried. Underneath is a nervous system that doesn't trust safety because true safety was never modeled or even experienced. Are any of them familiar to you? If so, how many? I would love to know in the comment section below. And please know that if you do relate to any of these beliefs, this is not because you're weak. It's not even because you're broken. It's very much like a computer, an expensive, amazing computer that somebody else puts malware into. We don't get rid of the computer because the computer is valuable. You are valuable. The malware is what we learn to uproot. What we tend to do wrong is we try to fake it until we make it. Now, that's a strategy that can work in many situations, but it doesn't necessarily work when you have trauma beliefs. Trust me, I tried. No amount of forcing my body to act like it didn't feel what it was feeling helped. So there's a better way. And first we want to understand how these beliefs keep trauma alive. So like I was explaining earlier, when traumatic events happened when we were too young to work through it, to process it, or maybe the things happened too fast without support, well, the body pushes pause on that story. It compartmentalizes it and it creates a survival sequence in the body. I know you felt it. Haven't you ever noticed there might be a time, let's say if you had the belief, I don't feel safe to be me, and maybe you're feeling like yourself, But you're in a situation where suddenly you get a little bit uncomfortable and it's almost like something gets touched inside and you suddenly show up and now you're people pleasing or you're fawning or you're over explaining and oversharing. And a part of your brain's like, what are you doing? That's not you. That is that old sequence getting kicked on by some external stimuli in your environment. And then the belief that's still in your nervous system, because it's unprocessed, it's like the play button. It turns it on, and along comes all the coping skills, all the thoughts, and all the feelings of that old pattern, like dissociation, people pleasing, fawning, a harsh inner critic, or hypervigilance, to mention some of those coping skills. And then that sends us into a trauma healing loop of now I'm going to learn. I'm going to learn about what's happening with me. The thing is, no amount of self-help books, no amount of education, cognitive education alone will rewrite those patterns, because those beliefs live in your subconscious, in your body, and not in your mind. And your mind and your body speak two completely different languages. So what do? Well, we need to train our nervous system the way we train our muscles, right? If I want to get into shape, I have to find my capacity, where my body is currently at. And then if it's not where I want it to be, I need to build my body's capacity to be stronger. Well, we have to do that with our nervous system as well. And that's exactly what I help people to do in the School of Transformation. In fact, I consider it like a gym membership for your nervous system. I'm currently running a 30% off sale for monthly members. So in other words, for $77 a month, you can join me live every week on Zoom. There are 7 to 9 meetings each month, and together we train your nervous system to build capacity to feel safe, to expand your window of tolerance, and to finish those old survival sequences. So if you're ready to take the next step, come join me live on Zoom.